My name is Roy Hawthorne.
Okay, and is that your full name?
Yes, it is.
Do you have an Indian name?
My Indian name is Kimplachitni Nez, but Indian names are not used very much, very seldom used.
Why is that?
I suppose because English is more convenient for documents and different things of that sort, mm-hmm. and just for I suppose for legal reasons. I don't know what nobody has ever said, but I suppose it changes with different people why they don't use the Indian names. But not everybody has an Indian name. My date of birth was February 13th, 1926.
And so where were you born?
I was born we call it a hamlet. I call it a hamlet of Ganado, Arizona, which is about 40, 50 miles northwest of where we are now.
And right now we are
at Lupton, Arizona.
Have you lived here long?
I've lived here in this area since probably I was about 4 years old.
Except for your service time.
Except for the service time and some other time that I spent after I got out of the service. But after all of this going to and fro, I've lived here with my family for 30, 40 years. We didn't have any rank in the service. That might sound real strange, and it's not totally true. But I say that to emphasize the fact that code talkers hardly ever received a promotion. And of course, there was a reason for that, which was a military reason. We, as code talkers, we weren't carried on the general table of organization. After the war, when my division, which was the 1st Marine Division, went to China, I was promoted to corporal there. And a few of the other code talkers were also were promoted to corporal during that period of time. But generally, code talkers were not promoted.
How did you feel about that afterwards? Did you feel like it was?
Well, as I think about it now, it was an injustice because many of us were qualified for promotion, and it just didn't happen.
Did you find? Well, let's start with when were you enlisted? What was your story about enlistment?
I enlisted in 1943, probably sometime in June, and I was 17 at that time. Several of my brothers had already gone either to the Army or I think one had already gone into the Marine Corps. And I enlisted because that was the thing to do in that day. And so that's what I did. I wanted to enlist in the silent service, which is the submarine service. But and I suppose the reason that I wanted to do that was people, when I tell them that, say, well, how did you know about the submarine service? You have no oceans, no water, and so forth. And that's certainly true. However, I had been reading a book by Julius Verne, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which was very captivating, very fascinating, and I wanted to be a submariner. But when I got to the induction station, I was informed that that the federal government had passed legislation which required all Navajo males from that point until the duration of the war be enlisted or inducted into the Marine Corps. And so that's what happened. And very early on, when you're dealing with military things, you learn that you don't ask why. And so I didn't ask why. It wouldn't have done any good if I did ask why, because the why part was kept secret. I mean, it was classified. So I didn't ask why. They didn't tell me, and I never knew why until after boot camp, and I was assigned to Camp Pendleton in California, and the Navajo Communication School. And then nobody had to tell me why, because that's what we were doing. It became very obvious what the mission was. Yes, we were speaking Navajo, and the Navajo that we were speaking wasn't conversational Navajo, but it was from the code that had been developed, and sending tactical messages and receiving tactical messages. So it was quite obvious what our mission was.
How did you feel about that when you learned that? Was that giving you a little more? Were you a little more intrigued by it, or how did you feel?
No, I don't think any of us were intrigued by it. It was just another day at the war, and we were not only working with the Navajo language as a military code, but we were learning most all aspects of military communications, like Morse code and semaphore and different other things, field wire communications and all aspects of communications. So we didn't. I didn't, at least, feel intrigued by it. It was just a job, just another duty.
How long were you at Camp Pendleton?
I wasn't there very long. When I arrived there, the war was full steam, and the replacements were needed all the time. And so I was in Camp Pendleton maybe 3 months, maybe not quite that long. So you had to learn real fast and retain everything you learned, and be ready whenever you got the call that you were going to be shipped out. We were shipped out back in those days. Today, you're deployed.
It is interesting, the language.
Yes.
So when you were shipped out,
yes,
where did you ship out to?
I went to Guadalcanal.
Wow.
Now, Guadalcanal was secured by the time I got over there. But it was interesting. Every day was something new things.
Of course, was that the first time you'd been away from
home?
From home?
Yes. For most of the code talkers, that was true. Of course, back then, the infrastructure out here in the Navajo Nation was practically zero, like roads, communications, all of these things were very primitive, and means of transportation was very limited. Usually, it was either by horse or by wagon. Once in a while, there would be some sort of a vehicle, but that was a little bit uncommon, and so you didn't travel any. I met one of my cousins on Okinawa. We were talking, doing a field training with the Navajo Code, and I was talking to this person and asked him about himself, and he told me, and that was my cousin. And so I visited him there. He was in a different division, and we visited. But the thing is that while we were here in our land, it was practically impossible to go these distances and visit one another. So we had to wait for the war to come along and take us a long ways from home and bring us together in that way. So so most of the Navajos, not just the Code Talkers, but all the Navajos that went into the service, it was their first experience, let me say, beyond the horizon.
And how was that for you, beyond that horizon? Was that?
It was entirely new and different in many things that I didn't understand. So many things that were very unfamiliar to me. Simple things like the operation of a telephone, and that became if I were to use one, I never did at that time. But it was a major project because we didn't have telephones. There were telephones in say in trading posts and different things like that, but for the average Navajo, he never came near a telephone. I got on a train in Phoenix. They had assigned me to go to San Diego to the Marine Corps recruit depot. And so it's the first time I was near a train, except to see them running along the tracks here. They gave me one of those little tokens that you put in a bus or whatever, and they said, now this is very important that you don't lose this token. And I didn't know what token was, didn't know anything about that, but they said, you hold on to it, don't let it go. And I did. I held it in my hand all during the trip to San Diego. And of course, back then, traveling wasn't like it is today. I mean, talk about a sardine can. It was a little sardine can with a double portion of sardines in it in all transportation. So, but I held on to that token. And they also said, well, when you get to San Diego, there'll be a sergeant there. Well, they didn't tell me what a sergeant was. I didn't know what a sergeant was. If it was a person or a thing or what. And how they didn't say how I would recognize him. I didn't know what to look for. But just, kind of figured it out that he probably would be some guy from the Marine Corps. When I got there, I was alone as far as other Navajos are concerned, or other people going into the service. But when I got there, I looked for a sergeant, but I didn't see one. And I waited, and I still didn't see one. I saw these buses coming by, and they'd come up and they'd stop, and they had the names of their, found out later was their destinations on top, but that meant nothing to me. So I just waited for what I thought was a sufficient, appropriate length of time. And then I decided, well, the next one comes along, I'm going to get on. And I did. And so I got on, and fortunately it was going by the Marine Corps base. And so I had no problem there. And I got rid of my token.
With the bus?
On the bus, yes. That's right.
So when so you got on the bus and they said, "Where's your token?" Or
no, I said, "Do you want this?" The driver, he never asked for a token because everybody riding that bus knew what to do with them. But I didn't know what to do with them, so I said, "Do you want this?" Yeah, he said, "Put it in there." He's unconcerned there. So that's the way it was getting to the Marine Corps base. Well, in Guadalcanal, the island was secured, but we went on field training exercises all the time. getting ready for Okinawa. Of course, we didn't know what we were getting ready for Okinawa, but that's what it was. And so we'd go on the field training exercises, and we were trained, of course, in using the Navajo code, voice radio, what do you call it, Morse code, and other things. And so we utilized all of these in our training. We were also trained as general Marines, which means that you are trained outside of the expertise area where you were going to function most of the time. So we were trained in mortars, how to use mortars, machine guns, and different other weapons, and we continued the training with those weapons and instruments on Guadalcanal, and in Okinawa. We did use the different things like mortars and machine guns and so forth. That wasn't our primary job, but if you were needed, then you knew how to perform that specific task. So we did other things outside of using the Navajo code. That was our basic job, but we did other things as well. And so on Guadalcanal, it was all training, getting ready for Okinawa. There.
So when did you learn about Okinawa?
When we got there, we didn't know where we were going.
So they just shipped you out again?
Oh yeah, we were shipped out again, and of course that was a policy back in those days, and you didn't know where you were going. Today, if a unit is going to Iraq, everybody knows about it. They know what a unit's going to Iraq and when they're leaving, and so forth. But in that day, nobody knew. I suppose the Japanese knew before code talkers came into the picture. They knew, and the way that we knew that they knew was because they would pick up our transmissions before code talking came into being. They would pick up our transmissions, and they were encoded, but they would break the code, and so they would break it right away, and they would come onto our frequency and say, "Thank you, we'll be there waiting for you," and they were there waiting for us, and so they were at that time winning the battles, just practically on a daily basis. They were winning battles because they could break the code so quickly, and they knew what we were going to be doing. But then when the Code Talker program was established, it turned the whole thing around. The whole picture was turned around. The Japanese could not decode our messages, and as a result, they weren't winning the battles like they had been winning the battles, and so the code, the Navajo code, unbreakable as it was, really changed the picture and turned things around there. I must say this, that the person that I feel is really responsible for the Navajo language being used as a military code was not a Navajo, and you probably already know this. He was not a Navajo, but he was a son of a missionary couple from the Midwest. I always want to say Mideast, but it's not the Mideast, the Midwest. And of course, they came out here when he was just a small boy, and he grew up with Navajo boys and girls as his playmates. Learn the language, learn customs and ways and traditions, all these things. Then when the World War I broke out, he served as an engineer with the Army, but he had on his mind that this language probably could be used as a code that would be unbreakable. And the Army had experimented with other Native American languages. They were unsuccessful, not because of the language, but because they were not encoded. They tried to use just a conversational language. They didn't code the language, and so they were unsuccessful. And so the military people just were very leery of trying it again when Mr. Johnston came up with this idea. But he persuaded him after a while that at least try it. And so that's when Congress authorized 30. I believe it was 200 or maybe 300 that the Commandant, General Vogel, Commandant of the Marine Corps, at that time had requested, but they cut that down to 30. And the military was really skeptical that Indians could do anything. But that wasn't just the military either. I mean, it was a general population, the Anglo population of America, that was skeptical that the Indian could do anything. I mean, he was not an underachiever; he was a non-achiever. And so, when I was inducted into the Marine Corps, and I raised my hand and I swore allegiance to the United States of America, and I became a Marine, that's when I became somebody. And that's when the whole world realized that they had made an error, and that it wasn't true that Native Americans were non-achievers, that they were achievers. And so that's what makes me very, very proud of the fact that we were chosen to do this specific task, and so we did it.
And did it well.
That's what we understand. But again, I must say that to most of us, and maybe for all of us as code talkers, it was just another day at the war. I mean, we just did what we were supposed to do. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can go in different directions. And we will go back to that direction I'm thinking of, which is your school and how your early education.
Mm-hmm.
But let's keep on track with the war and where you went from that point to Okinawa. What was your experience there?
Okinawa? I had some very vivid experiences on Okinawa. Some of the experiences that I remember mostly involve times that I was assigned from my unit to go to another unit to go on patrols with that unit, either a combat patrol or a reconnaissance patrol. Of course, a reconnaissance patrol, you go out and you locate the enemy and find out his strength and where he is and different things about the enemy, but you don't engage in combat with him on a reconnaissance patrol. So I went a number of times on reconnaissance patrols and also on combat patrols. Combat patrol, you find the enemy and you attempt to destroy the enemy. One particular patrol that I remember involved a ridge. Of course, there are hills and ridges. It's where most of the battles were fought. But this was on a ridge called the Keisha Ridge. Usually I don't remember the names of these places, but somehow or another this name just I don't have to think about it to recall it. It's just there. But it's called the Keisha Ridge. And we went out looking for the enemy, and our mission was to destroy the enemy. So we found the enemy as we came over the top of this ridge and began to come down the other side. Then we discovered that the enemy was there because he opened up with all sorts of weapons, machine guns and mortars and whatever else he had on hand. The other thing we discovered was that the enemy had, probably in years gone by, dug trenches on the side of the hill of the ridge that we were on. And the machine guns were zeroed in on these trenches. So if you tried to take cover in these trenches, well, you were dead. So we were pinned down. The unit I was with was pinned down for, I don't remember how long, at least 2 days, maybe 3 days. During that time, probably maybe a few hours after our encounter with the enemy, the antenna of my backpack radio was destroyed, shot off, and couldn't send any message. So we needed to get a message out for reinforcements, or for an airstrike, or for an artillery strike, but it couldn't do it. The radio just won't work without an antenna. But as you recall, I had stated that we had been trained in various aspects of communication, and one of those was field wire. And of course, with field wire, you have wire cutters and other instruments there, tools, and you have wire. Of course, I didn't carry a large drum of wire all the time, but I did always have some wire in the other tools. So with these, I was fortunate enough to repair the antenna where I could get a message out. I sent a message. Of course, the message originated from the commanding officer, which I think was a lieutenant. He may have been a captain. But he gave me the message. He had it written down in English, and I sent it out in the Navajo code. And in just a few minutes, a very short time, the Marine Corsairs came over and made the airstrike and saved the day for us. Now, we had code talkers with every division, at every level of the division. And then we had code talkers on command ships and on all other kind of ships. But I was talking to another code talker a few years ago, and he was telling me of some of his experience on a command ship at Okinawa. And he said, I received this message one day. I'll just let that ring.
Okay. Well, you want to?
No. Anyway, I received this message he said, I received this message one day that came from a Navajo code talker, and was requesting an airstrike because they had been pinned down by the enemy. And so I said, well, that was me. You know, I'm the one that sent that message. And anyway, so the enemy was hit by the airstrike, and most of his firepower was knocked out, which enabled us to overcome that enemy. But during that time, many of our men were killed. Others were wounded, and some, at least one that I know of, had no physical wounds, but there was the emotional thing, and sometimes that's more severe than wounds that you can see. But they had to carry this man, this Marine, off that ridge because he was what you might call a basket case, and so that's the way that war is.
What was the name of the code talker that you?
His name was he was a tribal judge for many years. I can't think of it right now. I know it, but I can't think of it. Yeah.
That's interesting. That was just a few years ago that you learned or had that knowledge.
That's right. His name was William D. Sosi. He changed his name. I don't know if he changed it from something else to Sosi or from Sosi to something else, but that was his name.
That's a great story. How many men would be in that unit that you were?
There were probably 70, maybe 90.
And were you the only code talker in that group?
Yes.
So,
See, the code talkers were usually assigned in pairs to different units. Like if it was a battalion or a regiment, there'd be 2 code talkers at battalion, and maybe 2, maybe 3 at regiment. And then as you go on up the line to division level, headquarters, then you'd have maybe a dozen or more at division level.
So, but on this particular one, it was just you.
Yes, my counterpart, we would alternate. One would stay with the unit headquarters, and the other would go with the unit going out into the field. This is on the patrols that I'm talking about.
So if something had happened to you, that whole unit could have been decimated.
That's true. That's true. But it would have been more difficult for that unit. But I feel that they still could have won that battle because there's always a way. I mean, you could send a runner. He's going to take a little more time, maybe a lot more time, and he may not get through the first time, but eventually you're going to get through. And I don't know, Americans just have a tenacity that you're going to win that battle.
I understand the Japanese had quite a tenacity as well.
Yes, they did. They were a real match.
So after Okinawa, how long were you in combat there?
Okinawa, I understand, was the longest battle of the Pacific, and also the bloodiest battle of the Pacific. Because Iwo Jima was very bloody, and so were many of the islands like Tarawa, Saipan, and other islands. But because of the duration of the battle on Okinawa, it was reported that it was the bloodiest battle of the Pacific, and it went for, I believe it was 3 months, give or take a little bit of time.
You were very young.
I was 17 when I went in, so probably about 18.
Were you scared?
Actually, I wasn't. I didn't know enough about what was going on to really assess the situation. I suppose that's the way it was. But I don't remember having been afraid or scared or frightened. But I probably was, because the brain has a way of blocking out some things that are unpleasant to remember, and so I think probably I was, and if I was, it was probably not at the time that we were encountering the enemy, but at a time that we were encountering friendly fire. I don't know, it just seemed to me that friendly fire just seemed so much more devastating than enemy fire.
What's friendly fire?
It's fire from our own troops, like from a battleship, for instance, or from one of our own artillery units that have gotten the wrong coordinates and are firing on their own men. That's friendly fire.
So that happened.
Oh yes, it happened a number of times, and we're talking about being afraid. If I ever was afraid, well, it probably was in one of those times. But I wasn't afraid in the way that I wanted to run off or hide or something like that. It was just, I don't know what, I can't describe it. But there probably were other incidents where similar things occurred that you just don't remember.
When friendly fire would occur, would you quickly get on the radio?
Absolutely, yes. And there was a time before the code talkers that the Japanese would come on the radio and say, you're on the wrong coordinates, change it to a different one, and they would put it on our men. And so the rule became, if you receive a radio communication requesting a fire or a cessation of fire or a movement of that fire to another coordinate, don't receive it unless it's in Navajo code, because it could be coming from the enemy. And the Japanese had many of their men that had gone to Ivy League colleges and universities in America, and they could speak the language very fluently, and they would come on the radio and give this misinformation. So the rule became only Navajo code messages for requesting fire or seizing fire or relocating the fire.
So after Okinawa, what happened? And was that your most memorable battle experience?
Yes, that was. In fact, that was my only battle experience. It was my baptism of fire came on Okinawa. Before that, it was just getting ready for the battle, whatever the battle might turn out to be. After Okinawa, we went to China, but we didn't do code talking in China. We served as General Marines in China. That was when the communists were attempting to take over the nation. And
so when was that you arrived in China?
That was, when was that? Say 45, the war ended, so it was probably during the ending months of 1945.
So it was after the bomb had been dropped?
Yes.
So how long did you stay in the service? When were you discharged?
I was discharged from the Marine Corps in 1946. I remained out of the military for 2 years, and then I enlisted in the Army Airborne and served in the Army Airborne for a number of years. My total service time, I believe, was something like 15 years. When I took a medical retirement, I served in Korea, and I was wounded in Korea. But even after I was wounded, I stayed on because being a military person was actually my boyhood dreams. I mean, that was my aspiration to be a military person, and so getting hit by mortars or machine gun fires and being disabled wasn't going to stop me, and I stayed on as a soldier.
Tell me about your experience in Korea.
In Korea, that's where I was wounded. Yeah. In Korea, I wasn't in Korea very long. But my experiences in Korea, I was in the infantry, but I was in communications, and in Korea, my job. The war in Korea was different than the battles in World War II, where you were out all the time, either on the front line, getting off of it, or going to it. But in Korea, the attacks were not going on all the time. They were sporadic. The battles were sporadic, and there was the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, with the North Koreans on the north side and the Chinese over on the other side also, and the Americans over on the south side. But it wasn't very far. But we could see each other, maybe from here to that rock cliff. And the steep hills, we could see them over there, and on these hills, we would have forward observers, and they would be in bunkers, and they would be looking out over the land and observing what the Chinese were doing, and they also had their forward observers. They were watching us, and so my job was to keep the field communications intact. Now, the enemy, one of his first objectives is always the communication lines. If it's a radio or field telephone, knock out the communications, and that's what was always happening in Korea. I was at one point, they called it the spring offensive of the Chinese, and they were really tearing up everything.
What year was this?
I don't know. I don't know. It was the year before the truce. I don't know. I will say 1955. But I'm probably wrong. But anyway, so they were coming down in great strength. Many men were being wounded. Many men were being killed. The communications was being totally disrupted, and we really didn't have enough men. I didn't have enough men that in my squad, and so. I was working almost 24 hours a day, and then finally I got some replacements, and these were just boys. Of course, we were all young, but these were really young. Maybe they had just graduated from high school. Some not. They hadn't graduated from high school at that point. And this was their first experience under fire. So one morning, early in the morning, probably about 2 o'clock in the morning, I always had a field telephone, and I had laid down to get a few minutes of sleep, but the phone rang. And they said, well, the phones are out. So I got up and got my men together, and we went out. And we came to a place where there was something going on in a ditch there, where the wires were laid. There were cables, and at that time. You suspect that every noise that you can't identify is the enemy, and probably we thought. Well, I thought, well, that's the enemy. He's in the ditch there where the communication lines are laid, and that's probably the enemy. So I threw a couple grenades and a few rounds from a rifle there, but we didn't stop. We just went on. We don't know, we don't know whether it was the enemy or not. But if it was, we killed him. And we went on, and we'd test every so often. And if we couldn't get back to the switchboard, then we'd know that we'd have to repair that. But we came to a point where we couldn't get back to the switchboard, and we weren't there very long when there was a great flash of light. I didn't hear a sound. This was a mortar shell that exploded, and it hit me. I was wearing a flak jacket, so it didn't penetrate that flak jacket, but it did every place else, on my arms and on my legs, and so I really, it happened so fast, I didn't know what happened, and it didn't knock me down, but I began to slowly go down, and when I went down, I knew what happened. I looked around, and I couldn't see anybody there. All the men were gone, and so I thought, well, they must have been killed. And so I started calling their names. Nobody answered. So I thought, well, I guess that's right. They've probably all been killed. So I crawled over into a ditch because I knew that they were going to throw some more mortars in there. And I crawled over in the ditch there, and they had taken my field phone. One of them had what was holding it. He took it, so I couldn't try to call back.
So you had fallen down, and the enemy had come over to you, and taken your
No, it wasn't the enemy that took it. It was one of my men.
Oh, I'm
It was one of my men that took it, and so it wasn't anything I could do, but just wait there and see what happened. So after a while, one of the other guys showed up. He was probably the older of that group there, and I asked him, "Well, are all the men killed?" He said, "No." He said, "They're sitting up there by that tank. There was a tank up on a hill that we had come by that tank." So I told him, "You go up there, that tank, and you use their radio or whatever it is, and you call into the aid station and tell them to get a medic out here." So he did, and they came in a little while and put me aboard that thing.
So what were your injuries?
I had practically it had practically severed my leg below the knee on my right side, my right leg, practically severed it. I had injuries all up and down on my thighs and on this arm here. And when I got to the aid station, which was I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 miles from where I was wounded, my lieutenant was there. He was about the same age I was, maybe I think about 24 years old. And so the way I remember it, I could just see blood every place. But as I think about it, I thought, well, it probably wasn't all my blood, but others coming in there. But he was really shaken by what was happening, particularly to me because I was in his unit there. And so he said, "Sergeant," he said, "you're going to be all right." But he was crying. He said, "You're going to be okay." And I wasn't thinking whether I was or whether I wasn't. And so he said, "Sergeant, I'm going to put you in for a Bronze Star for this." I never got a Bronze Star. I don't know what happened there. But then I went to various. I had the privilege of riding on a MASH helicopter out of there into a MASH hospital unit. They took me into the company aid station, and that's really the last thing I remember for I don't know how long. I woke up on a hospital train, and I saw one of my men that I had been with. He was on there. He had been wounded very slightly, and so he picked up a bunch of X-rays, and he looked at them, and he said, "Well, he said, you're not hurt very much." He said, "You're going to be okay. You'll be up walking around." But he must. Of course, he didn't know how to read those things anyway, and it didn't turn out that way. But the next thing, major thing I remember is being in a tent. It seemed to be a very large tent with hardly any light in it at all. And doctors coming by my bedside, sort of like the bed was here, or whatever it was, and they'd come in and walk kind of a little distance away, and they'd walk by. They wouldn't come close, but they'd look over, and they'd make little noises like saying, something like that, and they'd go on. And then a nurse came up behind them, and she came over, and she took my hand, and she said, "Chief, you're going to make it," you know, and that probably was an encouragement there. It encouraged me, although I didn't know much about it. But for a long time, I would think about why were the lights so dim. And then I came to knowledge that it wasn't the lights that were dim, not in that tent. It was my lights that were going out, and so that's the way that was. But they didn't go completely out.
So you were basically just sort of semi-conscious.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And what about when you finally came to? What was the extent of your injury?
The extent of my injuries, well, I went to a regular hospital in some other place in Korea. It was in a building, and they brought a lot of the wounded there in a school bus that was fixed up with litters, and there were a lot of wounded soldiers. So we got there about noon. They took us off. And I remember they took me in and put me in the hall, and everybody's going to lunch, so I'm just there in the hall for a lunch period. And then when they came back from lunch, they pushed me into this room with a big light on it there. It was a surgery room, I guess, a big light there. And then next thing I knew, I woke up after they had done some surgery, and the doctor came and said, "Sergeant, got good news and bad news." He said the good news is, I forget how he put that, but he said the good news is that you're on your way out of the Army, and I forget what he said. The bad news was. But that wasn't good news to me. You know, I was a career military, and so I told him that's not good news for me. I said I'm going to continue. I'm a career military person. So that was that, and went to a number of other hospitals. Spent a year in Walter Reed Army Hospital in D.C.
A year.
A year there, and then, but you know. It wasn't devastating to me. It was just a hindrance, and so I liked to stay on in the service, and I did for a number of years after that, and got back on my feet and was ready to go again.
So you healed.
Oh yes.
You said your leg was almost severed.
Yes, it was, and they had to do it. They had to amputate it. In the hospital.
They did?
Mm-hmm.
So you have a prosthetic?
Yes, on my right leg.
Well, you certainly wouldn't know it. You walk beautifully.
Sometimes I forget it myself. My parents, they back in those days, Navajos had large flocks of sheep. So my parents had large flock of sheep, but they also sold Navajo or Indian arts and crafts, things like this bolo, silver and turquoise jewelry, Navajo rugs, and so forth. That was before the freeway came in, interstate highway, and the traffic was a lot slower. And people, you could have roadside stands, and so they did, and that was one means of their making a livelihood there. And I had, I think it was 6 brothers and one sister. Of my 6 brothers, I think all of us served in the military at one time or another. There were 3 of us that served as Navajo code talkers.
Really?
Yeah. But of course, it was classified, and we couldn't talk about it for 26 years after the war ended, and so we never talked to each other about that. We just assumed that that's what he did also, but we never did discuss it. Never talked to our parents about it. Never talked to anybody about it. It was just something we just didn't talk about because that's what the order was. My mother's name was Desba, Desbah. That's a common Navajo name for a girl, Desba. And my father's name was Orville. That's my middle name.
So, did he have an Indian name as well, your father?
His name was Bi'izihi.
What did that mean?
Nobody knows. Nobody really knows, but some people that I've talked to have said that means handsome, and they would say that at certain times he would put on his fancy clothing and so forth, like when he's going to rodeo or something like that, and that they named him after that.
And what about your grandparents? Do you remember your grandparents?
I don't remember them. I remember some things about them, but I don't remember them. I was talking with another relative, maybe it was a cousin here, not too long ago. He was telling me of his doing research in the family tree, which is very unusual for Navajo to do that. But he was talking about that, and he was telling me about my grandfather. And I had great respect for my grandfather. But when he told me about my grandfather, that he served as an Army scout against his own people, then I don't have any respect for him anymore, because that's like it's a turncoat. That's about all I know about him, that he served as an Army scout. And
that is fact.
Yes.
So he was gone before.
Oh, a long time before, yes. Yes. Now my uncles, I remember 3 of them. I think 2 of them were medicine men, and I was scheduled or set aside to live with one of them, and he would train me to be a medicine man. Of course, back in those days, you would begin training when you were very young, and continue till you were about 30 years old before you had your credentials to be a medicine man. So I was scheduled to do that, but he died before I got of that age that I was to go with him. So I never became a medicine man. But school was an interesting place.
Yes, tell me about that.
Well, I began school at a public school, not far from here. When I reached, I believe it was the 7th grade, I went to a boarding school, a Bureau of Indian Affairs boarding school. And after I went there, soon after I went there, my brother went there also. And so I was in 7th grade, and he was maybe 5th grade.
Had you learned English by that time?
Well, we were bilingual.
From the beginning?
From the beginning, yes. Now, this is called the I-40 corridor here. That's what it's called now. And the people that live in this corridor are mostly bilingual because of proximity to the border town in Gallup and Holbrook, and a lot of English-speaking people traveling through. So most people are bilingual here. But you get back further, say Monument Valley and Navajo Mountain, places like that, in the interior. Not all people are bilingual there, but we were bilingual.
So you didn't have the experience of being taken and told not to speak?
Yes, I did have that experience, and both the experience of being informed of the prohibition of speaking the language and the punishment. I experienced both of those. Usually when one of the Navajo kids would speak the Navajo language, and we weren't all just little kids, so some weren't enrolled in school until they were 16, 17 years old. But they would speak the Navajo language to help another student who wasn't bilingual and was at a loss to understand what was going on. And then you'd try to help him there, and that's usually the way we would get into trouble. But then, on the other hand, there were people, there were youth that would be bent on getting into trouble, and they would speak it just to show their opposition to authority, and they would get in trouble, and that would become habitual, and they would get more severe punishment. And of course, the punishment, the initial punishment was just getting your mouth washed with lye soap. If that didn't work, then they'd strap you with a belt or something. And if that didn't work, well, then if you were really bad and habitual at it, and then you would be put in a basement. And if that still didn't work, then you'd be put in a basement and strapped more severely there. The more severe forms of that punishment were rather rare, but they did happen.
And that was in your grade school?
Yes. Yes.
So was that just a public school?
No, public schools had no prohibition against the language.
So the grade school you went to first was an Indian school?
No, it was a public school.
Oh, it was
a public school. I didn't go to the government school until I was in the 7th grade.
Oh, I see. So you were in the public school with Anglo and Native.
Yeah, there were Anglo and Native Americans, and there were, at that time, there were many Spanish or Mexican people that worked on the railroad that went to the school also.
I see. So you didn't have that prohibition.
Not in the public school.
So then you were going to at 7th grade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 7th grade is when that experience came into being.
So why was it? Was that just because you were moving up to the next level that you went to that school, or why did you?
I don't know why it was. It was a decision of my parents, and I don't really know why that was. It may have had something to do with economics. Probably did.
So how far away was the school that you went to?
It wasn't a long distance. It was at what is now known as Fort Wingate, which is east of Gallup. But when we went there, my brother and I, and we were not in the grade level that the rest of the kids were. Of course, see, I was in 7th grade, and I was in the 7th grade classroom. All the kids were in 7th grade in that school, but it was not the 7th grade according to the standards of the school that I came from. It was probably 4th grade, and so the teacher didn't say, well, we'll put you up where you can be challenged to a higher grade. She didn't do that, but she said, well, you already know all this, so you just go out and play. So we played every morning till noon. It was a vocational school in the afternoon, so we played all morning, my brother and I, and then in the afternoon went to vocational school, which was more play.
So it was like a vacation.
Yeah.
But not a whole lot of learning.
Very little learning. Yeah. You know, if they'd put us where we could be challenged, then it would have been all right, but they didn't do that. But a lot of the code talkers came out of that school. Not, I wouldn't say most of them, but a lot of them did come out of that school. I enlisted in the Army before I graduated. Not the Army, but the Marine Corps before I graduated. But while I was in the Marine Corps, I still had a searching mind, and I got to know a Marine that was very intellectual, and so I'd sort of pick his brain whenever I could. I learn additional things in English, and in math and so forth, and which prepared me to. I took a test like a GED test, but it wasn't a GED test. It was a military test for high school completion. I took that test and got my high school there, and then went on to Bible seminary, and got the bachelor's and the master's there, and to Christian college in Ohio, where I got a PhD. Yeah, you get to where you understand that without it, you're not going to go very far. It was a Navajo chief that spoke to that, and he said education is a ladder. He said, picture yourself down at the bottom of a canyon with steep, sheer cliffs, and he said education is the ladder to the top of that cliff there. He said, climb that ladder.
Who was that chief? Do you remember who that was?
Who was he? Manuelito, Chief Manuelito.
Did you feel like being a code talker helped catapult you to this place where you are? That experience? Well,
the overall military experience was very helpful. Yes, it was quite maturing.
Do you think that had an effect on the Navajo people, itself, the experience of the war and bringing the Navajos into the war in that way?
Well, it certainly had an effect on those that went into the military. Most everything that we experienced had been up to that time foreign to us. It introduced us to to other cultures that we probably knew may have existed, but weren't really positive about it, and knew very little. It gave us knowledge of how to interact with other people, and open our eyes in so many other different ways. It let us know that we could do more than what people had thought we could do. That life could mean more than simply herding sheep, which that was really a part of the Navajo life, and it wasn't something we disdained, but it was something that had no real productive end, no productive goal, and of course we didn't realize that before the war, but when we went into the war, we realized that there are many opportunities out there, and then with the GI Bill, that afforded an opportunity to fulfill our educational goals and objectives. So that's what the war did for those that went there, and for those that didn't, it just simply showed that there were many things that we could take seize the opportunity on those things.
So how were you treated in the service? Were you treated as an equal? Did you feel any kind of barrier there, or any kind of discrimination?
I didn't feel any discrimination. Someone asked, I think it was when they were filming Hollywood versus our history versus Hollywood, or something of that sort. And they had several code talkers there. And one of the questions was, what you asked, was any discrimination? And how did you feel when people called you chief? So I remember one of the fellows saying, he said, well, at first, I didn't like it. But then he said, when I thought about it a little bit, I thought, boy, that's good. He said, when I came in, I was just a brave, but now I'm a chief. And, we were misunderstood, but we misunderstood our counterparts also. The Anglo boys, or the white boys, had the idea that we were expert bowmen, and we could use a bow and arrow and hit the target bullseye every time. But the fact was that we had never used bows and arrows. We didn't know anything about them. And so one day in Oceanside, California, near Camp Pendleton, we were out on leave for the evening, and there was a carnival going on. We went to that carnival, a group of us. There were Navajo boys, Navajo Marines, and white Marines. And so the guy there had a place where you had bow and arrow shoot to get a prize. So we were standing around looking, and nobody wanted to do that. And so some of the white boys kept saying, excuse me, to us, show them how to do it, Chief. And then they kind of narrowed in on one particular fellow, who later became the chairman of the Navajo Tribal Council, which is president today. And so they said to him, Chief, pick it up and show them how to do it. Because he didn't know how to do it. So he picked it up, and that arrow went who knows where. That's we were misunderstood in that way. And then on our side, we figured, well, white is right. Not everybody felt that way, but that you could you didn't lie, cheat, or steal, or do any of those things. I mean, you lived a decent life. Well, those ideas didn't last very long. I mean, they were dissipated real quickly. And when we found out that our desires and wants and so forth and our failures were all the same. We were alike in so many ways. So
it was a good life learning experience.
Yes, it was. Now, there probably was some discrimination, but it would usually come from someone who was a little dysfunctional themselves, and just came from a background that would enhance that. And just because you put on a uniform doesn't mean that you're a good Marine or a good soldier. You carry over some of the things out of your background, like in the ghettos or the big cities or wherever, with all the hoodlumism going on, and that would carry over. You'd find some people like that. And with the Navajos, same thing existed there.
People are people.
You're right.
Of course, that was, I guess, created out of ignorance, of course.
Well,
and taught to the children by the parents.
Sort of. But that goes back to why there was a prohibition against speaking your native tongue. Not so much a prejudice, but there is that bit of prejudice there. But it was the idea of the federal government, people in the federal government, that we need to annihilate the Native American population, and various methods were tried. And one of these methods was if you get rid of the language, then that'll be a big step towards annihilating the population. And that was one reason for that language prohibition. Then there were other things that happened also.
The long walk.
The long walk, yeah. And so
the
forth.
buffalo.
Yeah.
Lots of things.
Yeah. Now, another one was where the government passed legislation that Native Americans could claim 160 acres, much like the Homestead Act. And that was to get 160 acres under the control of an individual Indian. And because his culture was different and didn't recognize land ownership, then he wouldn't understand that. He wouldn't understand that he owned that land. And so the ranchers, many of the ranchers were behind this, that then the ranchers would come in and get that property from him with a little bit of trickery. He wouldn't know that he was selling it, that he could sell it, and so forth. But he would get rid of it, and it would become the property of the ranchers then, and he wouldn't have any place to go. So, but prejudice is on every side. It's on each side. It's not on with one race of people.
That's true. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well, I can't think. Can you think of any other additions that you'd like? Any other special stories that you have that were poignant in your life, in your growing up?
Well, I don't think of any right off, but I do think of another incident on Okinawa, and that involved not a patrol, but it was an assignment to take a certain hill where the enemy had occupied that hill. And so our commanding officer said, we have to take that hill tonight, because if we don't, in the morning they're going to come down and take us. So there was I suppose we'd call it a patrol organized to go up that hill that night and take that, kill all the Japanese up there. So I was assigned to go with that patrol, and so that that day, it was before nightfall. We started out, and we went a certain distance where there was a lot of cover, but then we came to a place where there was no cover at all. There was no trees, no boulders, hardly anything. And so when we began crossing that area, the enemy began shelling us, and so we couldn't cross without getting all annihilated. So we withdrew. And by the way, Marines never retreat. They might advance in the opposite direction and regroup, but they never retreat. I could tell you some stories about that, but I will just go on with this story. So it was decided that we would wait until darkness and then cross that area and have radio silence all night until we got up to the top, so the enemy wouldn't know that we were out there. And so that's what we did. We went across that open area, started up the side of this hill, and some of those hills are more like mountains. And the next morning, just when the day was beginning to break, we came up on top of that mountain or that hill, and we see the Japanese there. They're making breakfast, getting ready for breakfast. So the officer in charge gave us the command to begin firing upon them, which we did. But we found out pretty quickly that they had more firepower than we did, and they had more manpower than we did, and that we needed reinforcements, or we would be overrun. So the commanding officer wrote out a message that of what was happening, and that we needed reinforcements. And he suggested that since we needed them right now, we can't wait till night. We need them right now. He suggested that get a number of tanks and put as many Marines as you could in each tank, and which was maybe 3 or 4 Marines in each tank, and come on up that hill, which is what they did. And so I don't know, there were about 10 tanks, maybe. They may have gotten 4 Marines in each tank, so about 40 additional men there, and they brought those up. And so with those men, we were enabled to overpower the Japanese and take that hill that morning. But there again, another instance where the Navajo code was used for. If the Japanese could have decoded our message, they would have known exactly what we were going to do, and they would have brought in other means to thwart the tanks from coming up there. So they didn't know, and so tanks came up, troops were there, and we annihilated them.
Saved the day.
They saved the day. Yeah, that's right.
What point did you leave the service?
I was stationed in Fort Carson, Colorado, by Colorado Springs. And so it was where I could request a medical retirement anytime I wanted to. And I did, and I was retired, medically retired. But the reason that I requested that medical retirement wasn't because I no longer wanted to be in the military. I still was in love with the military. But the reason was that in the time between I was over in Korea, and I got back to Fort Gordon, Georgia. In Fort Gordon, Georgia, I became a Christian. And after I became a Christian, I felt in my heart God's call to me to be a minister of the gospel. And that's why I requested a medical retirement. And so I got that, and I still a soldier, different uniform, but I'm still a soldier. We have been married for 53 years, and I've been a preacher of the gospel for 48 years.
My goodness.
So we were married before I went to Korea.
Do you have children?
Yes. When I went to Korea, we had one son. We have 5 children now, four sons and a daughter.